From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We're going to start with a check on the markets today. Joining us, Abigail Doolittle. So, Abigail, up again, maybe 3 weeks in a row. At the same time, we do have a virus. We don't have a stimulus. Why?
You know, so much noise out there really focusing on the markets. And the reason that we know that is the fact that we do have the S&P 500 and the Dow up 3 weeks in a row. All of these headlines, this reacceleration of the virus in Europe, also here in the U.S., the case count, the highest since it's been since early August. Very worrisome, plus no stimulus once again. So you could say we're climbing the wall of worry because, again, stocks up 3 weeks in a row. The tech-heavy NASDAQ, David, in fact, up 4 weeks in a row, the best streak since the end of August. And that, of course, was that big powerhouse month. And today we have bonds lower. So there really is this risk on tone despite all of these uncertainties. This has been the story right out of the March lows, that despite everything going on in the world, stock investors are all in buying stocks for sure. And that's once again the case today, David, even with options expiration. Yeah,
they are irrepressible. No question about it. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle. We were supposed to have the second presidential debate last night, but instead we got dueling town hall meetings, one moderated by ABC News' George Stephanopoulos and featuring former Vice President Joe Biden, the other moderated by NBC News' Savannah Guthrie and featuring President Donald Trump. The contrasts were sharp, including over the economy and the president's response to the coronavirus.
I knew it was a big threat. At the same time, I don't want to panic this country. I don't want to go out and say everybody's going to die.
We make up 4% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's deaths. We're in a situation where we have 210,000+ people dead. And what's he doing? Nothing.
We had the greatest economy in the history of our country last year, including the state of Florida, where we are now, and Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, and Ohio, every place. We had the greatest economy we ever had. We had to close it down. We saved 2 million lives. We're opening it up. We have a V-shape, and it's coming back. It's coming back very fast.
You have 91 out of every of the Fortune 500 companies not paying a single solitary penny. If you raise the corporate tax just back to 28%, which is a fair tax, you'd raise $1.3 billion by that one act.
Famed pollster and political strategist Frank Luntz convened one of his real-time focus groups to watch the events last night, and he joins us now to give us what he saw and learned. So, Frank, thank you for being with us. I want to put you on the spot a little bit. Last time you were with us, this was after the first presidential debate. You said, given where the polls are right now, President Trump needs to have 2 debates in order to have a chance of coming back. Did last night count as one of them?
It did not. I mean, the people who like Trump now love him. The people who like Biden now love Joe Biden. But I don't believe that it really changed many hearts, many minds. In our session, I don't know if you got a clip of it, but in our session, I finally figured out what it is that is causing these people to remain undecided. And it's not that they're low information voters. And I'm offended by reporters who are now trying to force them to choose sides when it used to be that if we analyzed the candidates, if we came to an informed decision, that would be something that we would applaud. These people are undecided because they agree with what the administration has done, but they don't like Donald Trump. They don't like the way he communicates, don't like the way that he relates to people. They like Joe Biden very much. They feel that he empathizes and cares about them, but they are scared, still scared about his economic policy and that he won't be candid about where he stands on the Supreme Court. So it's basically Donald Trump's administration versus Joe Biden's policies, or it's Joe Biden's persona versus Donald Trump's policies. They can't decide which one is more important to them.
Well, let's talk about the persona a little bit, because I, like a lot of Americans, flip back and forth between NBC and ABC to really compare them. And I couldn't see more of a contrast in the presentation. By the way, the moderators as well. Savannah Guthrie was quite assertive, where George Stephanopoulos was much more reflective, talking about policy. But goodness sakes, Joe Biden talked at some length about policy. But President Trump was very combative throughout, didn't you think?
He was combative, but that's because he had a combative moderator. And we asked that question because I think it's important. And our group, 16 participants, 14 chose George Stephanopoulos' style, and only 2 chose Savannah Guthrie's. It's a town hall. I'm going to repeat that. It's a town hall. That means it's their event. Everything else is about the reporters and the candidates. This is the one time when the voters get a chance to challenge, question the candidates. It took NBC 20 minutes to get to their first voter question. That's not a town hall.
Yeah, I saw exactly the same thing. I was watching my watch and asking myself the same question. Because, of course, this was to replace a presidential debate that was going to be a town hall format. That's the whole theory, is that voters get to ask questions directly of the candidates. We're getting down to brass tacks now. We don't have that much time left, and a lot of people have voted already. Is it possible for President Trump to turn things around? Or, let me ask a flip question, is it possible the polls are just off?
Anything is possible. People keep asking me, well, what about the October surprise? What will it be? Donald Trump got COVID, and he ended up in Walter Reed for 3 days. That's not an October surprise. They canceled the second debate, which we've been having every election cycle for decades. That's not an October surprise. The economy, everything that happens every single day is worth a month in any other election. So anything can happen. That said, I believe that pollsters are better today than they were 4 years ago. I believe that they're watching their sampling much more effectively than 4 years ago. And one more point, Hillary Clinton was projected to win on election night by 2.8%. She won on election night by 2.1%. It just wasn't in the right states. Yes, we're not a popular vote, we're in a republic. And the electoral college determines who wins. But there's no way that Donald Trump can make up 9.5%. The polls cannot be that wrong. He's going to need an exceptional debate performance. And if he does anything like he did in the first debate, because he lost it, and he lost it significantly, and voters turned against him because of it, if he does the same thing 1 week from today, then he will definitely lose this election.
So, Frank, we have such a short period of time left to go until the election. You're such a good student of these things. What are you going to be looking for? Putting aside the black swan, because even apart from COVID-19 for the president, we also had the death of a Supreme Court justice and a confirmation process. So there have been at least 2 black swans already. Putting that aside, what are you looking for?
And I'm looking at the economic crisis, the COVID crisis, the healthcare crisis, the political crisis. We've never had more crises happening at the same time, and Americans are just exhausted from the whole thing. I'm going to be watching whether Donald Trump has the ability in the last 19 days to show any sense of humility before those final people go to the polls. And for Joe Biden, I'm going to see whether he's ever going to answer that question about the Supreme Court, because in the end, the public has a right to know, and he should be answering it.
Yeah, he didn't answer it again last night. That's exactly right. Thank you so much. It's always great to have you with us. That's Frank Luntz. He's CEO of Luntz Global. Coming up here, Tony Ressler of Ares Cap Management is here with his views about what we need for the economy and for the country if we're to measure up to our potential. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Return now to Mark Crumpton for Bloomberg First Word News.
David, thank you. The number of people who've been infected with the coronavirus worldwide has topped 39 million. More than 1 million people have died. That's according to the latest data collected by Johns Hopkins University and Bloomberg News. Europe is seeing a resurgence of the virus. The United States has the biggest caseload in the world with nearly 8 million cases of COVID-19 and more than 217,000 deaths. The United States is followed by India, Brazil, and Russia. After his town hall in Miami, President Trump is back on the campaign trail today. He'll deliver a speech in Florida on protecting America's senior citizens. He then heads to Georgia for a Make America Great Again rally. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is campaigning in the battleground state of Michigan. He'll deliver remarks in Southfield on affordable health care. Tonight, Mr. Biden will attend an event in Detroit to urge residents to vote early in person. 5 of the men accused in a plot to kidnap Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, are headed back to federal court today for a continued hearing on whether there is enough evidence to charge them. The preliminary hearing began Tuesday and has included hours of testimony by a lead FBI agent who said members of anti-government paramilitary groups from several states discussed abducting Governor Whitmer or Virginia's Democratic Governor Ralph Northam. Russian President Vladimir Putin is trying to save the last existing nuclear arms control pact between his country and the United States, proposing to extend it at least for 1 year. President Putin said today it would be, quote, extremely sad if the New START treaty ends. The agreement was signed in 2010 by President Obama and then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. It limits the number of nuclear weapons each nation has. It's due to expire in February. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. Tony Ressler is the co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Ares Management, but he's also an active member of the Atlanta community as head of the Atlanta Hawks basketball club and someone who is very involved in the revitalization of the downtown of Atlanta. And we welcome him now back to Bloomberg. So, Tony, thank you so much for joining us. One of the things I know you're doing is you're using the arena down there as a voting mechanism. Tell them what's going on down in Atlanta right now as people are starting to vote around the country.
Thanks, David. Listen, it's a pretty remarkable opportunity for the Atlanta Hawks to help a community and to help our community whenever possible. But let's face it, State Farm Arena today, we thought we could be really the safest, most efficient polling location in the history of this country. That was our objective. And we thought we could help voting rights in Atlanta, help people get out to vote. And we are doing exactly that. We have over 300 Hawks employees working. I think we're getting something close to 20% of the voters in Fulton County. And as importantly, we're getting people in and out in under 20 minutes. So we're making the experience, I think, really special and efficient. And it's something we're, as you could appreciate, enormously proud of. I would argue it's a sort of a perfect example of what I'd call a public-private partnership, where we are helping the community that we live in, and we're proud of it. And I guess just last point, I think there's 20, 24, 25 other arenas or locations around the NBA that are following us in trying to help their respective communities. So I guess we did go first, but we're just enormously proud of the process, and it is working, I guess is what I'd like to say.
Well, and it's good to know because we've heard so many accounts of the problems anticipated about the voting process this time around and whether it's going to be legitimate or not, whether it's going to take too long, whether it's safe, and know that at least it can be done. You're showing it can be done. But as I say, you're more than just involved in voting in Atlanta. You're also very involved in the revitalization, some of the issues in the urban revitalization of Atlanta. Tell us about why you're involved in that, what you're seeing in Atlanta, because we are, after all, having an election at a time when there's a lot of talk about the growing difference between the haves and the have-nots. Wealth inequality is growing, income inequality is growing. We have a lot of racial tension in a lot of places, including in Atlanta.
Well, Atlanta, in addition to being a great city, is a microcosm of what's happening in America. And we do have an extraordinary mix of communities in Atlanta. But let's face it, in this country, the economic disparities are one of our biggest issues and not improving as quickly as they should. Blacks and Latinos are twice as likely to be poor. A tenth of family wealth in the African American community versus the white community. 60% of median income. We have to do something. And I think that the big message is this is a public sector and private sector issue. And yes, as you could appreciate, we're trying to make an impact from the private sector, but the public sector is doing its fair share, or should be, whether it's a second CARES Act, whether it's increasing minimum wage, whether it's subsidizing healthcare, whether it's improving K-12 education. That's all part of the public sector that hopefully we can push. But the private sector has to do its fair share. The private sector should be trying to create more diverse companies and industries. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's something that's good business and the right thing to do. I think the private sector should absolutely be trying to provide both mentorship and access to capital for Black and Latino companies that haven't had their fair share of access to capital in this country. And these are things the private sector could do and could do effectively.
So, Tony, as you say, it's both a private and a public sector issue, and one that both of them have to work together. But in order to fix it, it helps to know, how did we get here? Because most economists I've talked to say that basically from after World War II until about 1980 or so, it was going in a good direction. The pie was growing overall, and in fact, income and wealth inequality was reducing rather than growing. And then something happened around 1980, and it's true in both the private sector and the public sector. As a practical matter, what happened, and how can we turn that back around again?
Listen, whether or not we look at this from 1980 or earlier, or even more recently, when you see the really extraordinary wealth created in the technology sector, and frankly, a result of low interest rates, where you are seeing the wealthy get wealthier. So there's a whole lot of things that we could point to. I think my argument would be there's also many things we could point to help fix this problem. Highlighting our problems without highlighting potential solutions, it just doesn't make sense to me. And I do believe industries and companies, virtually every industry in America, can take a 5 or 10-year plan to say how I could become more diverse, because it's good business. And frankly, creating opportunities. And I keep saying creating centers, which we're going to do in Atlanta as an example in the process, creating a center where you have both mentorship and access to capital to help minority-owned businesses. But these are things that the private sector can help, I would argue, and actually go after this issue of economic inequality, which is a serious, serious issue. But there are solutions, not overnight solutions, but real solutions that take focus from both the public sector and the private sector.
Well, and to pick up on one of those possible paths to solution, I want to pick on one that I know you're involved in, and we know the individual involved as well. It's the Promise Homes Company with John Hope Bryant, somebody we had on during the Democratic Convention. Explain to me what they're doing and why they might be at least one part of the answer.
Listen, we invested in the Promise Homes Company because John Hope Bryant is a force of nature. He is buying homes and putting folks in homes, not just giving them dignity, but giving them financial literacy and helping them improve their economic situations. And by the way, it's good business. So we invested with John, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. I think he's over something in the neighborhood of 670 homes. He's probably the largest minority-owned single-family rental company in America, and growing. But more importantly, or as importantly, John is an entrepreneur. He's also, I might add, helping in the financial literacy across this country discussion, but he's also an entrepreneur that is buying homes attractively, making them rentable, and helping his renters. And by the way, getting over 90+% occupancy, having folks meet their obligations, and building a business. And to me, that's what America should be about. And the more minority-owned businesses, frankly, the more John Hope Bryants, the better off this country is going to be.
Tony, I want to focus on the private sector for a moment, because we've heard a lot now about stakeholder capitalism as somehow a revision, perhaps, of the orientation of corporations. So it's not just about the shareholder, but you have to think about the stakeholders more broadly. And I wonder whether that is one of the things that has changed over time. And are we making progress in going back to stakeholder capitalism the way that many people are advocating right now?
Well, again, I'm not great on some of the terminology, but stakeholder capitalism, I've heard progressive capitalism, I've heard compassionate capitalism. Listen, businesses, the private sector generally, businesses, business people are supposed to be part of the solution. They're supposed to help their community. They're supposed to help their employee base, and they're supposed to try to make money, all of which is completely reasonable. And at the end of the day, I think that private sector individuals, business people, want to make the world a better place. Yes, of course, companies make mistakes. And when you make mistakes, you fix them. But at the end of the day, can you be a force of good in your community and in your business? I think the answer is yes, and make a decent return on invested capital.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you about. Are you doing this because it's the right thing to do in terms of morality, or are you doing this because you think it also will benefit the investor in the longer term?
Listen, I wear a bunch of hats, and the simple answer is I think it's both. I think you could do good and do well, whether it's at Ares Management or at the Atlanta Hawks or at the NBA Foundation, where I sit on the board. I think we could do good and help the community around us and still make a decent living. So to me, I just don't see why it has to be one or the other. And most folks I've met in the private sector want to be positive members of the community, of course. And by the way, what I don't want is to see private sector folks expect or rely exclusively on the public sector to fix this country's problems. I think it's a partnership. And by the way, voting at State Farm Arena, I think is just a tiny example of that.
Okay, it's really great to have you with us, Tony. It's fascinating. Tony Ressler, he is Ares Management Executive Chairman. And check out Wall Street Week. Larry Summers, Bob Diamond of Atlas, and Afsani Beschloss of Rock Creek Group will be joining us tonight. That airs at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Still ahead, our stock of the hour is Pfizer as it talks about seeking emergency use authorization for a vaccine. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Pfizer and its German partner plan to seek emergency use approval from the FDA for their COVID-19 vaccine. The filing could come a few weeks after the election, and Scarlett Fu has the details in our stock of the hour. Scarlett?
And you can see there that Pfizer shares rose as much as 3% to a 6-week high and is helping lift the healthcare sector to the best performance among 11 groups. The CEO, Albert Bourla, posted an open letter on Pfizer's website. And I point that out because it's rare to be so explicit with every step for a drug in development. But of course, there's a lot of public interest in this, as well as accusations of a politicization of the process. Nevertheless, here's the gist of it. In order to meet Pfizer's late November filing target, a lot rides on the safety review. The vaccine needs to prove effective in a large late-stage trial. The FDA requires at least half the people be monitored for side effects for 2 months, and Pfizer could get an initial readout later this month. Now, because Pfizer is one of the front runners in the race for a COVID vaccine, this timeline pretty much puts President Trump's promise of a vaccine before Election Day out of reach. Pfizer stock is down for the year. It's been held back after it got kicked out of the Dow Industrials to make room for Amgen, but you can see its German partner has soared. In total, some 170 COVID vaccines are in development. Most are still preclinical, but there are 42 in some stage of human trials. And within that group, only 10 are in the final testing stage. The furthest along, obviously, are Pfizer, along with J&J, Moderna, Novavax, and AstraZeneca. But you'll recall that we've already seen J&J and AstraZeneca halt their clinical trials after patients got sick. And unlike some of the other drug makers, David, Pfizer is not using public funding on its vaccine. So it really is riding a lot on this, and it is looking to sell the vaccine for profit as well.
Fascinating. And that's over and above, of course, the treatments of places like Regeneron. So there's an awful lot of work going on in the pharmaceutical industry. Thank you so much to Scarlett Fu for that report on Pfizer. Coming up next, the head of the AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, is here to talk stimulus. We hear it's on, we hear it's off every single day, maybe even every single hour. There's a different report. But do we have to wait until after the election? That's going to be the big question. We're going to ask it of Richard Trumka of the AFL-CIO. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. There are more than 2 weeks to go before Election Day, and millions of Americans are breaking voter turnout records already. According to the University of Florida Elections Project, more than 17 million people have voted already, either in person or by mail. Ohio and Georgia have already set records. Democrats are casting early ballots at a far higher rate than Republicans. If Joe Biden wins the presidency next month, he plans to fill his national security team with officials well known inside the Washington Beltway who have a lot of government experience. Bloomberg has learned Mr. Biden has 2 top candidates for Secretary of State. Longtime aide Tony Blinken, who served as Mr. Biden's national security advisor, and Susan Rice, the Obama-era national security advisor, who was on Mr. Biden's shortlist for vice president. Top Pentagon and intelligence posts are also expected to be filled by people who have worked in those fields for years. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says there's still a divide with the White House on fiscal stimulus, even as the two sides get closer to a deal on coronavirus testing. Pelosi has called that a major roadblock in recent talks with Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. In a letter to fellow Democrats, the Speaker laid out a number of what she called poison bills, including a liability provision that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has been pushing for to protect businesses from coronavirus-related lawsuits. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is now planning for a no-deal Brexit. The Prime Minister blames the European Union for not offering good enough terms on a free trade deal. He says he's still willing to hear from the EU if the bloc's leaders come back with a fundamental change of approach. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks very much, Mark. We turn now to that stimulus bill that just won't die. No sooner had Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that it would be, quote, difficult to get anything done before the election than he's down to exchanging language with Speaker Pelosi, at least on the testing part. Back with us is someone who has supported another round of fiscal stimulus for months now, Richard Trumka. He is the head of the AFL-CIO, which represents over 12.5 million workers across the country. So, Richard, great to have you back with us. Give us your best sense. Is this gone until after the election, or is there really a chance something could get done?
Well, look, the chaos and disarray of Republicans in Washington is costing our country dearly right now. Trump, McConnell, and Mnuchin can't get on the same page for COVID relief 19. Mitch McConnell says no more than $500 billion. Mnuchin says 1.8 trillion, and the president says that's too big. Then he says it's too small. It's a chaos. It's going to be difficult to get something done. And each day that passes is a loss to our country. Jobs lost, wages lost, health care lost, housing lost, and lives lost. Look, cases are up 18% to their highest level since July 31st. And at least 17 states are experiencing their highest increases in the pandemic. They have to get their act together so that we can get this thing done and help the American people.
Give us a sense of your workers. As I say, you've got more than 12.5 million of them that you represent. How is it affecting them as a practical matter?
Well, first of all, there's two groups. Those that are working are still experiencing difficulty in getting PPE because the OSHA, or the Department of Labor's department, OSHA, will not issue a pandemic standard to protect them, and they've not been on the job to protect them. Those that are laid off are running out of unemployment. They're losing their health care. They're in chance of losing their homes, and this aid is directly it's imperative that they get it soon. And as I said, each day that goes by is more loss to the economy and to the American people.
We had dueling town hall meetings last night. I'm sure you watched at least part of them. I don't recall the stimulus issue really coming up in either one of the town meetings. What did you make of last night?
Well, first of all, the pandemic came up a lot.
Yes.
And you saw President Trump again denying, spreading misinformation, and you had Joe Biden talking about a plan to get it done. Look, we can't fix the economy until we fix the pandemic. You can't do that until you make workers whole and make workers safe. Thousands and thousands are still being affected in different industry across this country. It has to be done. I think last night you saw the difference between somebody who denies it exists or minimizes its existence and somebody who says this is serious. All of us have to address it together.
One of the things you really can't minimize, though, is the wildfires have been raging out in California. And you pointed out, actually, that the White House now has denied a request from Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, for some emergency aid. What is going on there? Because as I understand, the White House didn't even give a reason.
They didn't. Look, 8,500 wildfires. 4 million acres were burned. 9,200 structures were destroyed. 31 deaths. And Trump refuses a disaster declaration because the good people of California voted for someone else. David, that's just flat wrong. That's not American. The real disaster here is Donald Trump's playing politics with the lives of all people in California, Democrat, Republican, Independent. That's a disaster. He has to get away from this. We need a leader who will represent all Americans. And that's quite frankly why we represent and support Joe Biden.
Richard, staying in California for a moment, there's been a raging issue about law and regulation when it comes to so-called gig workers, people like the drivers for Uber or for Lyft. What is the AFL-CIO position on what should be done or not done with respect to regulation?
Well, first of all, the Uber, Lyft, Instacart, and DoorDash wrote Proposition 22 to create a special exemption for themselves from California law that requires app-based companies to provide basic protection to their workers. Prop 22 only applies to Uber and the app companies, and it's designed to maximize their profit at the expense of taxpayers and their drivers. The measure creates a competitive advantage for giant corporations that hurt workers and small family-owned businesses. We oppose it because it's bad for the economy and it's very, very bad for workers.
What should be done with the Ubers and the Lyfts, the app-driven jobs? Because it is creating jobs for people, right?
Exactly. But you want them to be good jobs, and you want them, the workers on those jobs, to have protections. The Supreme Court's ruled on this. And what Proposition 22 is, it's Uber and Lyft and Instacart and DoorDash's attempt to overrule what the Supreme Court said and take those protections away from those drivers. Things like the right to minimum wage, the right to paid sick leave, the right to safety protections on the job. They pretend, even though they control these drivers, that they're not their employees. The Supreme Court said they are. Proposition 22 would overrule the Supreme Court and say, these aren't drivers. We don't have to pay unemployment insurance. We don't have to pay workers' comp for these people because they just aren't our employees. And that's a fiction. This would fix it. The law as it is would fix it, and it would make sure that they pay their fair share and those workers get the protections that every other worker deserves.
Give all us a little bit of guidance here as we watch this election as it comes down to the very closing stages. What are you looking at in terms of what will determine how the outcome comes?
I think it's who gets out to vote right now. We're finding out that there's very few undecideds right now. Most people have made a decision. This is a referendum on Donald Trump. Do you want him as a president and the type of presidency that he's presented? Do the things like he did, deny wildfire federal aid in California because you voted against him or not? And so getting out to vote, we're seeing tremendous surge of early voting and mail voting in the United States. I think you're going to see an attempt by him to have those votes not counted and to discount them or to discredit the entire system, even those that were brought about by Republican-run elections. And so our job is to get the vote out.
As always, extremely helpful. Thank you so much to AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka. Coming up, we continue our swing state look at Florida with Christian Ziegler. He is vice chair of the state Republican Party. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
Tourism here in the state of Florida is our #1 economic driver. So until which time that we can actually beat COVID, tourists aren't going to come back here to the state of Florida.
People in this district, no matter whether they're Democrats or Republicans or independents, are tired of the chaos that we have seen the last 4 years.
What is driving the large vote by mail returns is the coronavirus. And this has impacted many small businesses, especially the leisure and hospitality sector, and all of the businesses tied to that.
The Biden-Harris ticket is ahead with seniors in Florida, and they're ahead because seniors see that Donald Trump has been grossly irresponsible and cavalier about his lack of concern for getting this virus under control.
I think unequivocally they're going to vote on the economy, #1. Everybody wants to see the economy come back.
That is a sample of some of what we've heard from about Florida so far this week as we continue our swing state series leading up to the election. Welcome now, Christian Ziegler. He is vice chair of the Florida State Republican Party and founder of Micro-Targeted Media. Thank you so much, Mr. Ziegler, for joining us now. You heard a little bit more Democrat than Republican in that SOT string, so this is a good chance for you to say what you think is going on in Florida.
Look, I think when you look across the state, I travel the state. I'm on the road nonstop, visiting, speaking in counties, knocking on doors in counties. And the energy couldn't be higher for Donald Trump in the state of Florida. He's really got wide support. And, I know there was a clip before mentioning seniors. I think seniors overwhelmingly support this president. I wouldn't believe any of the polls that are out there. The truth is people are a little bit afraid to share that they support Donald Trump because of the backlash that comes from the left and the media and, all the lunatics out there that really attack you if you say you support Donald Trump. But on the ground, people are responding favorably to the president's record. And really, you can look at the voter registration stats. I mean, no one's really talking about that on the Democrat side. But just in the last 4 years, we've gone by the Democrats having the lead by 327,000 registered Democrats more than Republicans to now, just yesterday, we closed the book, and it's 134,000. So we've dropped that lead by 60%. People are fleeing the Democrat Party, and they're coming to the Republican side.
As we come up to November 3rd, give us a little guidance on how to look at the results as they come in from Florida. Because let's be honest, Florida is critical, is key, particularly if Donald Trump is to be reelected. He really almost has to carry Florida. Is it likely that we'll get in the early returns more Democrats or Republicans that are having their votes tallied?
Yeah, look, here's how it's going to play out is Democrats, again, the Republican Party and Donald Trump's campaign, we've been focused on getting new voters into the Republican Party, and we've been very successful at that if you look at the voter registration. The Democrats, on the other hand, what they've been focused on is rescheduling their voters. So they've moved them from Election Day or early voting to vote by mail. And what that's done is created a surge in vote by mails being submitted by Democrats because, again, they're being rescheduled. But that will help on election night because those vote by mail ballots will be, I think, counted pretty quickly and they'll be reported. And then, obviously we have a state that's split by a time zone with the Panhandle. Over in the Panhandle, you have a lot of Trump support. So early in the night, you'll see a big Democrat lead, probably right at the beginning because of the vote by mail. And then you'll see the early vote drop and then the election day vote drop. And the Republicans will overtake the Democrats. And then, at the end, we'll also have a wave of Republican votes coming in from the Panhandle when they report an hour later or when they close an hour later. So that's kind of how it's going to roll out in the state of Florida. I would expect the results to be here in Florida. Obviously, you never know with our history, but I feel very confident that the supervisor of elections under Governor DeSantis are going to do their job. We're going to have results early in the night.
We talked to Representative Dunn yesterday from the Panhandle you referred to, Republican from the Panhandle, and he basically said it's three states. There's the North that tends to go more Republican, there's the South that tends to go more Democrat, and then there's the middle where it's being fought out. Do you agree with that analysis?
Yeah, typically that's the case. Overall numbers, yes, but I will tell you there's some focuses here. Is number one, up in the Panhandle, we're going to try to drive as much turnout there as we can. Obviously, we're doing that all around the state, but it's critical in the Panhandle. And those rural counties really offset some of the blue counties like Broward, Alachua, Leon. So that's our plan in the Panhandle. Along I-4, yes, they're a little bit more middle of the road, toss-up counties, toss-up areas. And we need to make the case on why they need to vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. But then when you get to South Florida, here's what's interesting this cycle is looking at Miami-Dade. Miami-Dade's typically a very blue county, and Democrats count on the number of voters there to really turn out and drive victory for them. I'm seeing record support among Hispanics, specifically Cubans. Look, I walked the entire district, the entire state. I've been in the Panhandle. I've been in some of these southern, rural counties, and the support there is high for the president. But I can't say I've ever seen such strong support as when I walked the Cuban portion right in the heart of the Cuban district in Miami. And, these people were coming out of their homes. I was wearing a Trump hat, and they were screaming at me in Spanish. And I was there with the guy that's coming in as the incoming, or he'll be coming in a couple of years as the House Speaker, and he's Cuban. And I was walking door to door, and I said, well, what are they yelling? Why are they screaming at me? And basically their message was, what is wrong with your country thinking about going towards socialism? I fled that. I don't want that. That's why I came here. That's why I love America, is it got me away from it. And now you're considering that. Shame on America. So I think that's the message around the Cuban community. There was one man that I'll never forget. He said, look, if you put up a brick wall between my car and the polling place, I will run through that brick wall to vote for Donald Trump, another Cuban American. So I expect us to have record support from the Cuban community in Miami, and that may really spoil for the Democrats their plans in Miami-Dade.
So I know the president's on his way down there. You're going to hear from him shortly down there in Florida. What is it that you want the president to say to the men and women of Florida? What is the thing that's going to motivate them to, as you say, come out and vote for Donald Trump?
Well, look, specifically this event, he's going to be coming out and speaking directly to seniors, which is a big demographic in the state of Florida. It's a demographic we're counting on. He's going to be talking about his efforts with Medicare. I mean, look, premiums have dropped by 34%. Prescription drugs under Medicare have dropped by 12% on average. So he's lowering the cost of drugs, lowering the cost of premiums. His COVID response, he was focused on nursing homes and really doing targeted responses there to help seniors. But just overall, I mean, that's his message today, is really focused on the seniors, which are, again, such a core voting bloc and core group of Florida here. But I think his message just overall resonates. I mean, look, seniors want a good economy. They want their retirement funds to stay strong, which they have been under President Trump. Seniors want safety and security. They don't want police defunded. They want police defended. They don't want their communities burning to the ground like we've seen up north.
Yeah,
so that's going to be the message, and I think that'll resonate.
But, Mr. Ziegler, they also want to be safe and secure from COVID-19. There's a fair amount of polling, including in Florida, that suggests that at least some seniors have gone over from Donald Trump to Joe Biden because they're worried about the handling of COVID. Do you think that those are inaccurate polls? Do you see something different in Florida?
Yeah, let me tell you about these polls. So it's interesting. I was speaking to a senior recently, and, I said, what do you think about the polls? And they brought up a very, very good point. And that's, look, when you say that when you admit that you support Donald Trump, immediately there's backlash from your neighbors, from your friends, from your family, because he's such a polarizing political figure. And because of that, a lot of these seniors typically, they just won't even share that they support the president or won't even say good words about him publicly because they are worried about that backlash. That's why you don't see a lot of seniors, wearing Trump shirts, wearing Trump hats. Really, the only people that are publicly showing the support are the people that can take the heat. Someone like me that's involved politically, I have no problem if someone's attacking me.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think because of that, it doesn't show up in the polls.
Yeah, you're the exception, without a doubt. No question about it. I really appreciate you being with us. It's very interesting to hear your perspective. That's Christian Ziegler of the Florida State Republican Party. Coming up, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's deadline on Brexit has come and gone. So where are we? We ask our correspondent in Brussels, Maria Tadeo. And also, Wall Street Week is coming up tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Among the highlights, Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders on the COVID resurgence in Europe.
Economies are not out of the danger zone, and in fact, if you're sitting in Europe, you feel like you're going back into a very risky period with curfews being introduced across France, tighter restrictions across large parts of the UK. The impact on the economy could be quite profound, so you can't turn off the support yet.
Once again, Wall Street Week will air tonight at 6 p.m. on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, set a deadline of Thursday to get a deal with the EU, and that Thursday was yesterday, and it didn't get done, but here we are. And so the question is, what happens next? Welcome now, Maria Tadeo, Bloomberg's correspondent in Brussels. So, Maria, give us an update here, because there was a deadline, but now, as I understand, the delegation for the EU is still going to go over and negotiate in England. Was the deadline real or not?
Well, the deadline was not real because, as you point out, it came and passed. The Prime Minister had made it clear he wanted to see by today, the end of Friday, and the summit that was happening here with all of the European leaders, where or not a deal was possible, or to get a very clear signal that a deal was imminent, that it was coming. He didn't get that, and then just went out and said, you know what, I'm unhappy with the way the talks are going, and at this point, we really want to consider a no deal and just trade on WTO terms. Now, when you look at the Europeans, which, by the way, they're saying, we're just stating the obvious, that we haven't actually made progress here. We could not just give him a deal at any cost. We've told him repeatedly. But the question is, does it mean we're moving closer to a no deal? Will the negotiations continue? We understand that they will. The timing is unclear because the Prime Minister doesn't want to seem weak. He had said this was do or die, and clearly it wasn't. He's also coming under pressure because of coronavirus and the way he's dealing with that. So it's a very complicated position when it comes to the UK. But the understanding is that talks will eventually continue. The deadline legally to get a deal is the end of the year. We know the Europeans like to take things to the very last moment. This is almost their strategy to learn the clock just run down, and that's where we are. There's no deal, but it doesn't mean it's a no deal either.
Yeah, on the other hand, you had an exchange, I think, with Mr. Macron of France today, where he sort of said, look, they're the ones who want to leave. It's not our problem. It's not my job to fix this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Look, it was I would say, a very interesting, almost angry reaction from Emmanuel Macron saying, don't put this on me. They are the ones that left. They decided to do that. They are the ones that really need to move. And we're not here to make Prime Minister Boris Johnson happy. If he's unhappy, I'm really sorry, but I'm not going to give him a deal. That is, I would say, however, the man that is playing the negotiation on the European side the most hardball. When you listen to Angela Merkel, she was much calmer. She said, as far as I know, nothing has actually changed. We still want to sit at the table. We want want to get this deal, and I do believe, and that is Angela Merkel, that it's in the interest of both the United Kingdom and the European Union to get a deal, in particular because there's so much uncertainty around COVID and what that may do to the economy.
And in the meantime, Prime Minister Johnson said it's okay if we don't get a deal. We'll just do it the way we do with Australia, which, as I understand, is basically WTO rules, which would really hurt Great Britain, I think.
Look, it would. And, you know, the funny thing about the Australian deal is that Australia doesn't really have a trade deal with the EU. This is just your simple WTO terms, and it means that it's almost a no deal undercover. It's a way to say no deal in a way that looks just prettier. But ultimately, what you're looking here is that he would not get the access tariff-free deal that he says he wants. Now, a lot of this is optics. As I mentioned, he came into this meeting saying this was do or die. We want to get this deal. He's missed that deadline. He's coming under pressure at home for many different reasons. And of course, this is the optics going into this, him saying, you know, I'm ready to go no deal. But
Right.
the reality is that probably talks will likely continue.
Okay, Maria Tadeo, thank you so much for that reporting from Brussels. Coming up, we'll have a second hour of Balance of Power over on Bloomberg Radio. Come and listen. This is Bloomberg.